Okay, I've been getting a lot of requests for help on today's homework because it is challenging. In fact, it's more at level 7th grade and 8th grade than 6th grade. I promise you will not be on the quiz or the test, but occasionally I like to throw something a little challenging at you, see who can do it. And surprisingly, about half of you have been able to do this on your own, which I think is really incredible. But this may, even after my explanation, you still may not get it, which is fine. But I'm sort of laying the groundwork for what you're going to see in 7th and 8th grade. So I'm going to talk about two methods here. Let's first look at the first dimensional technique. I'm going to look at how many quarter centimeter cubes would it take to measure up to these 1D dimensions of 2 centimeters, 7/4 of a centimeter, and 1 centimeter. So let's look at the length first. It's 2 centimeters. If I divide that by a fourth, I see that it's going to take 8 little cubes going across. If each cube is a quarter of a centimeter, it would take 8 of them to make up that length. So in terms of cubic units, my length is 8. In terms of cubic centimeters, the length is 2. But in terms of cubic units, my length is 8. If I look at the depth, how many fourths go into 7/4? Obviously 7. How many fourths go into 1 centimeter? 4. So in terms of cubic units, my volume is going to be 8 by 7 by 4, which is 224 cubic units. The 3D method involves me looking at this in a different dimension. I'm going to be looking at it in the third dimension. So we know that each of these little cubes is a fourth of a centimeter. So what would the volume of each of these be? Well, it would be, of a cubic unit, it would be 1/4 of a centimeter by 1/4 of a centimeter by 1/4 of a centimeter. That works out to be 1/64th of a cubic centimeter. That's how big each one of those little cubes is. It's 1/64th of a cubic centimeter. Or said differently, it takes 64 of those little cubes to make up 1 cubic centimeter. So now what I'm going to do is find the volume of the rectangular prism in cubic centimeters. So if I just take the dimensions they gave me, 2 by 7/4 by 1, I see that the volume is 7/2 of a cubic centimeter. But they didn't want that. They wanted to know how many little cubes it would take. So now I need to translate that into cubic units. Well, we just said that there's 64 of those little cubic units in 1 cubic centimeter. So if I just multiply the 7/2 by 64, I get my 224 cubic units. So you could do this problem either way. I think the first technique is easier than the second, but you really should understand both. So you may want to pause the video here and try this one on your own. I'm going to do the 1D method first. Let's see, how many 1/3 centimeter cubes would it take to fill up the length here of 5/3 of a centimeter? Well, obviously 5/3 divided by a third is going to be 5. So there's going to be 5 little cubes going across. So in terms of units, not centimeters, my length is 5. My width would be 4, and 2 divided by a third, I think the height would be 6. So if I plug those numbers in here, I get a volume of 120 cubic units. Now for the 3D method, what we're going to do is find the volume in cubic centimeters and then translate that to cubic units. So I got to find out how the cubic centimeters relate to the cubic units. So again, here's a cubic unit. It's 1/3 of a centimeter on each side. So the volume of that cubic unit would be 1/3 times 1/3 times 1/3, or 1/27th of a cubic centimeter, which means there's 27 of those little cubes in a cubic centimeter. So let's find the volume of the rectangular prism now in cubic centimeters. It would be 5/3 times 4/3 times 2. That works out to be 40/9, which doesn't reduce. Kind of ugly. But I'm not going to keep that anyway because I got to translate it to cubic units. Now, how many cubic units went into a cubic centimeter? 27, we said. So let's multiply 40/9 times 27. Comes out to 120 cubic units. So that's how many cubes it would take to fill up that prism. Now you might be wondering, why don't we just do the first method? Why do we do it both ways? Well, because this problem uses both one-dimensional measures and three-dimensional measures. They tell you that the length of a side of the little cubes that are filling it up is half a unit. But that's a 1D measure. They're saying the length is 1/2 of a unit. And then they give you the volume of the rectangular prism. That's a 3D measure. Well, you can't compare 1D stuff with 3D stuff. They're like in different worlds. So we either got to compare everything in the third dimension or everything in the first dimension. I think it's going to be easier to do everything in the third dimension. So I'm going to figure out what the volume of these little cubes are. If they're 1/2 by 1/2 by 1/2, then that means the volume of them is 1/8 of a cubic unit. So then how many of these little 1/8 cubic units will fit into this prism that's 6 cubic units? Well, it's just 6 divided by 1/8, which works out to be 48 little cubes.